Matthew and Luke have many similarities with Mark, but we find that the Gospels are not exactly identical accounts. We don't mind that because they are all written from different perspectives to different audiences. Each of the Gospels tell the story of the passion of Christ, his atoning sacrifice, his death on the cross at Calvary, and certainly on Resurrection Sunday, the glorious and triumphant victory of Jesus over death. The narrative that surrounds our text provides for us an opportunity to explain the meaning of Christ's passion to future generations. And if we fail to do that, if we fail to teach and to share the tenets of our faith with succeeding generations, we will be left with nothing but empty traditions that no one understands, and thus lose the meaning of our faith and practice. You know, most of us have been in church long enough to know the story of the Passion of Christ. You know, when excited crowds gathered in the streets of Jerusalem and celebrated that Jesus was the triumphant king they hoped would deliver them from oppression and the yoke of Roman domination. Each of the gospel writers tell the story in some fashion, but only Mark records the incident that is our focus of today. If other gospel writers copied sections from Mark's gospel, none of them thought this passage worthy of inclusion. They either ignored it or they just simply omitted it. And perhaps that is the reason why for so many years most of us in the church have passed these verses by without paying much attention to them. Or maybe you Bible study students found them too obscure or too difficult to deal with. In fact, any preacher or Bible scholar or reader of this passage could turn this text any way you desire to do it and would come up with different interpretations. The obscurity of this text would likely bring all of us to a different conclusion, and it would probably be pointless to argue the differences. So with that being said, my purpose today is to leave us with three questions that we may want to ask ourselves as we are on our journey toward Passion Week and the final leg of the journey to Calvary with Christ. The first question I'm inclined to ask is, who was this young man? The Gospels have, the Mark does not name him. He only says a certain young man. Now the Gospels have familiarized us with this word. In fact, Jesus uses this word certain in his parables, and the Gospels often use it. If you really want to know, 53 times in the Synoptic Gospel this word can be found. Many writers and commentators have concluded, Brother Billy, and I'm inclined to agree that when you see the words a certain man or certain woman, it is an invitation to put your name there. Yeah. So come on with me and put your name in this spot, a certain man or a certain woman, as we move forward. Now, rather allow me to put my name there, rather than engage in all of the speculations of who this young man might be. I want to say it like this: a certain young man named Thomas Tucker was following him. Now you feel free to put your name there also. I want it to be known that I am following Jesus.
That's right.
But make no mistake about what is happening in this passage, my brothers and sisters, because following Jesus is a dangerous endeavor.
Oh, yes.
You know, we have moved away and separated ourselves from the danger and adventure of following Jesus. We have, as a church, simplified the message and we've tried to make it as uncomplicated as possible in hopes of attracting a crowd.
Yeah.
We want all the complexities of discipleship removed from us. But let's be clear, following Jesus will lead us to a cross. A.W. Tozer wrote in his book, Keys to a Deeper Life, it is no longer either dangerous or costly to be a Christian. He says grace has become not free, but cheap. He says we are busy these days proving to the world that they can have all the benefits of the gospel without any inconvenience to their customary life. It is all of this and heaven too. But this obscure text in the Gospel of Mark tells us something that we are likely to overlook. That this certain young man was following Jesus, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. Once more, we can engage in considerable theories about the meaning of this, but for now, and for the sake of brevity, so that I don't hold you too long, I want to propose to you this analogy. Linen was representative of luxury. Jesus used linen as a symbol when he tells the parable of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16. Jesus says the rich man was dressed in purple and fine linen. That's right. And I thought it interesting that perhaps it would be as well for us to discuss maybe the degree to which the lavish and extravagant indulgence of our lives have left us separated from true discipleship. Oh, y'all pray for me in a few moments. And isn't it not interesting to you that many folk in the church want to have life and party, and do everything they want to do and go to heaven anyway? I mean, when it comes to this matter of discipleship, we want to claim to be a disciple, but don't ask me who I'm following. Y'all pray me, I'll be through in about 45 minutes. This text tells us that the Roman soldiers came to arrest Jesus, and that this young man was there wearing nothing but a fine linen cloth. Now, if we're seriously following Jesus on the way to the cross, we cannot overlook what being a follower of Christ means. Our culture has seriously done damage to the content of this conversation because we don't have conversations anymore about suffering and sacrifice. Oh, help me, y'all. Because we want to have something to show for our discipleship, like luxury linen, and fine things. Nobody is talking about sacrifice. Nobody is talking about suffering. We like to gather in churches where they talk about if you pay your tithe, you're going to get a car. If you give to God, you're going to get a house. No, if you serve God and give to God, you just might wind up on a cross yourself. So this brings me to my second question of this young man. What is he doing here in this text? What is he doing in the Garden of Gethsemane? Or can I make it personal? What are we doing sitting in these four walls? As they try to figure out the reason this certain young man appears in the story, the speculations of the commentators range from making this certain young man either curious or courageous. He was in the opinion of some that he was trying to help Jesus and prevent him from being captured by the soldiers. Others suggest that he was just following Jesus so he could see what was happening. And I'm not quite sure that the text supports either conclusion. We are just told that he was following Jesus wearing nothing but a linen cloth. And I'm not sure of what this certain young man was doing there, but I do know one thing. Whatever this certain young man was doing in the garden that night, there came a moment of crisis in his life. Verse 51 says they caught hold of him. The soldiers were arresting anyone they thought was associated with Jesus. And since this certain young man was hanging around, he got caught up in the sweep. So now, either because of his curiosity or his courage, he is facing a crisis. I cannot be sure of what brought him to this certain young man to the garden that night, but what I am certain of is that in all of our lives, and especially those of us who claim to believe in Jesus, there will come a time in our lives, a moment of crisis, or either our curiosity or our courage will be challenged. I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes I'm troubled by this opportunity when crisis shows up in my life. Y'all pray for me. I mean, when sickness shows up in my life, and what am I going to do? Am I going to cry to God, or am I going to thank God for what's happening in my life? Because I know my life is he's getting the glory out of my life, that somebody is watching me go through what I'm going through, and that will speak volumes to them in their lives. Or am I whimpering around asking everybody to pray for me, and y'all pray for me because I'm sick and I don't know if I'm going to get well. Well, this body is going back to the dust. Oh, y'all pray for me. I know where this body is going, but my soul belongs to Jesus. And I need to make sure that when my soul gets back to where it came from, that he will open his arms and welcome me, claiming, "You well done, thy good and faithful servant." This issue of crisis is going to affect all of us. In that moment of crisis, we'll have to make a decision and ask, why am I following Jesus? The crisis will make us ask, am I with Jesus? Because I'm curious. I just want to see what's going on. Or am I with Jesus because I am courageous? I will stand and die with him. Is discipleship something for me, hopefully an insurance policy against hell? Or am I willing to follow Jesus all the way to Calvary? I'm sure of this much. C.S. Lewis is right. He says, if we insist on keeping hell, we shall not see heaven. That's right, Lord. But if we accept heaven, we shall not be able to retain even the smallest and most intimate souvenir of hell. Mercy. Now this passage, my brothers, concludes, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. Apparently the garment this young man was wearing was fitting him so loosely that when the soldiers tried to grab him, they were unable to hold him. And we might have forgotten this. I mean, since it has been a while since we took our baptismal vows. Anybody remember them? You know, when we were baptized, we promised, or it was promised for us, that we would renounce the devil and all his works and vain pomp and glory of the world, with all covetous desires of the same and the carnal desires of the flesh, so that we will not follow nor be led by them. Anybody remember saying those vows? Well, I guess not. So I have one final question for us. What will you do if the culture or crisis grabs you? The fact that this young man ran off naked is intriguing to me, Mitch, because as I reread this passage, it turns out that this is no longer just a story. This is a status report of the conditions of our soul. This is a reflection of the way things are with us and with God. Whether this description of this certain young man who ran off naked is meant to be absolute or relative, whether it is figurative or a literal description, you got to understand that to be naked means we are vulnerable, stripped, uncovered, or bare. In other words, you can't hide or pretend anything if you are naked. As I'm on this journey following Jesus, I told you I was following him to a crucifixion at Calvary. I must ask myself if there is anything I'm using as a cover to hide that I am not a true disciple? Is there anything of the culture or my curiosity that has grabbed me and taken hold of me such that I am no longer able to be a courageous follower of Jesus? I don't know about anybody else, but I finally really come to this conclusion. This text revolves around the fact that this certain young man was following Jesus. Now, y'all remember, I already dared to put my name in the story. And I came to report to you that I have followed Jesus because I am convinced that Jesus is a Savior worth having. But a sacrifice this great cost God something, y'all. It cost the life of God's Son on the cross. And yeah, my friends, following Jesus, receiving grace and obtaining forgiveness could not be cost-free. It will have to cost me something. But I don't know, I need to share with you, but whatever the cost is, I already know that I made a promise and I'm going to be committed to that promise. I said and I tell the world I will be a follower of Jesus. I'm going to follow him because he has already paid the price. I remember driving down the road when I was a little bit younger, coming up on a toll plaza. When I got to the toll gate, the guy in the toll gate waved me on, and I wanted to know why. And he just simply said, the driver in front of you has already paid the cost. I stopped by long enough to remind everybody here that if you are following Jesus, if you are trying your best to be a good disciple, you need to understand, my brothers and sisters, that Jesus has gone before us and paid the price for us. We don't have to be afraid of the devil or his friends. We don't have to worry about other church folk who are not saved but showing up on Sunday morning wanting to criticize my dress and criticize my size. You can talk about me as much as you please. I know I'm following Jesus. I'm going up the King's Highway. I want you to know this morning that if you are serving to the best of your ability, it's got to be because he is a Savior worth having. Now I got a witness in here. I'm so glad I found out a long time ago that can't nobody do me like Jesus. Can't nobody treat me like him. He is my friend. In the midnight hour, when I'm all burdened down, he sits on my bedside and encourages me to run on. When I slip and fall, I falter sometimes. He picks me up, turns me around, dusts me off, and tells me to keep on going. I came to the conclusion that one of these days I got to let the world know I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. If nobody go with me, I'll still follow Jesus. I can't turn around. I will not reverse my course. My cross I'll carry till I see Jesus. Nobody's going to turn me around. Nobody's going to stop my progress. The world behind me, the cross before me. No turning back. No turning back. Is there anybody here who knows what I'm talking about? Are you on the battlefield for the Lord? Are you doing your best to walk with Jesus? I know things are rough. I know things get tough. But you got to know that Jesus is in control. And the suffering I'm doing down here cannot compare to the joy on the other side. Just let me